called Sacagawea. We're going to review some of the places we've talked about so far. So please point to the Atlantic Ocean. Right over here. This is the Atlantic Ocean. How about the Appalachian Mountains? Right here. How about the Mississippi River? Right in here. What about the Rocky Mountains? Right over here. How about the Louisiana Purchase? Right in here, which is between the Mississippi and the Rocky Mountains. What about the Missouri River? It connected to the Mississippi River at St. Louis and came out toward the Rocky Mountains. What about the Pacific Ocean? Right here. So today's read aloud is going to take place in those Rocky Mountains, so over here. What are the two tasks that Lewis and Clark have already accomplished? They made friends with the Native Americans, the Yankton Sioux and the Teton Sioux. And they encountered and made notes about the plants and animals. Some of the animals that they made notes on were the prairie dogs and the pronghorn antelope. Remember, they couldn't actually collect the animals because the prairie dogs, they escaped into their holes, and the pronghorn, they were too fast. Alright, so I've said this a couple of times, so I'm going to say it again. While not a lot of pioneer families who lived in the United States traveled into the Louisiana Territory, many Native Americans had already been living there for a very long time. Okay? I would like for you to describe the Corps of Discovery's encounter with the Teton Sioux and the Yankton Sioux. So the Yankton Sioux were friendly right away, right? And they guided the Corps for several days. But the Teton Sioux, they weren't so friendly right away. The Teton Sioux, they were prepared to fight the Corps, but eventually they became friends with Lewis and Clark, right? Why do you think Lewis and Clark need people who can speak other languages? They needed to be able to communicate with the Native American tribes, right? The Native American tribes, they each spoke their own language. Somebody like George Dreyer is called a translator, okay? And a translator is somebody who is able to say the same thing in more than one language. So he can be listening to what somebody is saying in one language and then repeat it in a completely different language. I want you to listen carefully to find out where Lewis and Clark spent the winter and who they decided to hire as a guide and a translator. As autumn approached, Lewis and Clark were in a hurry. They knew that the Rocky Mountains lay ahead, and they hoped to spend the winter there among the Mandan and the Hidatsa. The Mandan and the Hidatsa are two Native American tribes who had been friendly to Lewis and Clark. However, it was already so cold that the river was freezing into ice, and when the river froze, it was impossible to travel up the river in their boats. Where the Knife River flows into the Missouri, Lewis and Clark found 5 villages of Hidatsa and Mandan Native Americans. Like other Native Americans living on the plains, these people hunted bison, also known as buffalo, from horseback. They also lived in permanent earth lodges and farmed the land around their homes. This means that they had shelters that they did not move, unlike nomads who moved their shelters with them. 4 or 5 families shared each lodge, and even the horses spent bad weather days inside in a roped-off space just inside the entrance. The Mandans especially welcomed the travelers from the east because they were used to visitors. Other Native American tribes and trappers came to the Mandan area to share news and to buy and sell furs from beavers, bear, and elk, and bison. Across the river from one of the Mandan villages, the explorers built a wooden house and surrounded it with log walls 18 feet high for protection. They made the high log walls to keep them safe. The men of the Corps of Discovery called the winter home Fort Mandan, named after the Mandan Native Americans. They dragged the Peigrews onto the river bank, but before they could move the keelboat, the river froze around it. It took 3 weeks to chop the keelboat out of the ice. When the river froze, it had frozen around the boat, and the keelboat became stuck in the ice. They had other worries, too. Lewis told Clark, "We are eating so much food that we're going to run out before the winter is over. And in this terrible weather, it's getting harder to hunt." Thankfully, the Mandans appeared one day to tell them, "We have found a herd of bison nearby. Come hunting with us. We have brought horses for you to ride." The result was more food and warm blankets made from bison hides. As the winter nights grew long and temperatures plunged, or fell or dropped quickly to 30, even 40 degrees below zero, the explorers also traded with the Mandan for food. In return for the food the Mandan gave them, Lewis and Clark acted as doctors for members of the tribes who were sick or injured, and several of the explorers who were skilled or talented as blacksmiths made iron tools, axes, and arrowheads for the Mandans. The party spent many cold nights asking the Hidatses and the Mandans about the country that lay ahead. Lewis and Clark kept all the information they learned in a journal. Why do you think Lewis and Clark kept the information in a journal? Maybe so they would remember it? Then one day, a French-Canadian trader appeared at the gates of Fort Mandan. He announced, "I am Toussaint Charbonneau. I heard about you from the Hidatses. I am an excellent cook. I speak English, French, and several Native American languages. I could cook for you and translate what is said in other languages into English." Lewis and Clark, they couldn't speak any Native American languages, so they needed people who could talk to them and also to Native Americans they would meet. Also, one of their 3 tasks was to befriend Native Americans. Charbonneau had not come alone. With him was his very pregnant wife, a young Native American woman named Sacagawea. Sacagawea was a member of the Shoshone tribe who lived farther along the Missouri River. The Shoshone were the next tribe that Lewis and Clark expected to meet. Lewis and Clark discussed Charbonneau's offer. "Sacagawea could be helpful when we reach the lands of Shoshone. She could show the Shoshone that we come as friends, and she knows a lot about the countryside there." Lewis and Clark thought that Sacagawea could be a guide and a translator for the expedition. As for Charbonneau, if he is the cook he claims to be, he will be a welcome addition to our party. Lewis told Charbonneau, "We want you and your wife to join us, and of course we will pay for your work." This turned out to be one of the best decisions the co-captains had ever made, and while they had agreed to hire 2 new members of the expedition, they soon had 3. One cold night, Sacagawea gave birth to a little boy. Charbonneau, the new father, looked proudly at his newborn son and said, "We shall call you Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau." William Clark laughed. "That's an awfully big name for such a little fellow to carry. I'll call him Pompey." Pompey proved to be a good little traveler, too. Sacagawea's baby was nicknamed Pomp, or Pompey. Lewis and Clark organized their notes and drawings and labeled samples of plants and animals they had gathered. Remember, this was one of their 3 tasks requested by President Jefferson. When spring came up, Clark announced, "We have decided to split the party into 2 groups. We will send some of you back to the east to take President Jefferson the things we have collected and written. The rest of us will continue west." Remember, there were no telephones and no email yet, and there was no way to send mail in the Louisiana Territory. Lewis and Clark sent home some of the Corps of Discovery to tell Jefferson of their progress and what they had found so far. On April 7, 1805, some of the party returned back east as planned. They carried with them 4 boxes and a trunk filled with plant and rock samples, as well as the captain's journals and drawings. Here, the word trunk means a large, strong box used for holding things. They also took with them some living animals, such as a magpie and a prairie dog. A magpie is a black and white bird that makes a lot of noise. Lewis told Clark, "I wish I could see President Jefferson's face when that magpie starts chattering away. The president will be mighty pleased, and he will be delighted with all the information in our journals and our drawings." Clark replied, "He will be even happier when you and I report to him in person that we have reached the Pacific." What was the last task that they still had to accomplish? Finding an all-water route to the Pacific. Then the 2 men started westward once more with the remaining men, 1 woman, Sacagawea, and a baby. All right. Who did Lewis and Clark spend their winter with? They spent their winter with the Native Americans, specifically the Mandan and the Hidatsa. Why did they spend the winter there? Because their river froze and their boat got stuck in the ice. How did the Mandan tribe get food and where did they live? They hunted buffalo, right? And they farmed and they lived in permanent earth lodges, meaning they didn't move around. They stayed in the same place. What kind of relationship did Lewis and Clark have with the Native Americans you learned about today? Lewis and Clark had a friendly and helpful relationship with the Native Americans we learned about today. How do we know that? They helped each other. Lewis and Clark helped the Mandan who were sick, and the Mandan helped the Corps find food. And the Corps members made tools for the Mandan. Who was Sacagawea? Sacagawea was the Native American woman that Lewis and Clark hired to help them on their expedition, right? How did they think that she could be helpful? She could be a guide and a translator. Why did Lewis and Clark decide to split the expedition into 2 groups? They decided to split the expedition so that one group could travel back to President Jefferson and update him with their findings, while the other group could continue the journey west. What did Lewis and Clark have the men take back to Jefferson? They had them take back plants, rocks, animals, journals, and drawings, right? Why did Lewis and Clark keep the information in a journal? They kept the information in the journal so that they could send it back to Thomas Jefferson, right? All right, which 2 of President Jefferson's 3 tasks did Lewis and Clark accomplish in the read aloud today? They made friends with the Native Americans, and they continued to collect samples of different plants and animals. Which task have they not completed yet? They haven't found an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean yet, have they? All right, word work time. In the read aloud you heard, across the river from one of the Mandan villages, the explorers built a wooden house and surrounded it with log walls 18 feet high for protection. I want you to say the word protection with me. Protection. 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 Protection is something that keeps you safe. Livy wore sunscreen as protection so she would not get sunburned. What kind of things do you use as protection when you go outside in the sun? Try to use protection in your sentence. What's the word we've been talking about? Protection. Protection is something that keeps you safe. All right, listen to the following list of items. If the item is something you would use as protection from a cold weather, say, I would use that as protection. If the item is not something you would use as protection from the cold weather, I want you to say, I would not use that as protection. Remember to answer in complete sentences. A coat. I would use that as protection. How about a bathing suit? I would not use that as protection. How about a hat? I would use that as protection. What about gloves? I would use that as protection. What about a pair of shorts? I would not use that as protection. What about boots? I would use that as protection. All right, remember, protection is something that is going to keep you safe. Go check out your assignment, and I'll see you soon. Bye.